saw that. There goes one fast son bitch. Oop, there it goes. This is too high. I must be out of my mind. What? What is this? Are you joking? Do you idiots know what you've done? You screwed up 3 world records. I was to be the fastest falling man on the planet. I trained for months. In all the world, I have not met 2 people quite as stupid as the 2 of you. I must go. I can't stand you no more. Talk to the hand.
That's gratitude for you.
What a douchebag.
Welcome to episode 17 of Primetime UGC. We've got another great show for you. Logitech 007 is with us as guest author. Kirkfat and the captain will be reviewing one of his newest missions.
We also have Foundry Essentials with Kirkfat as he continues his Back to Basics series. We might even have a visit from an old friend. First, Castmodian brings you the news. Stay with us.
Season 7 drops on Dribble. Foundry Spotlights. 1000-Day Vet Rewards. Tonight on the news. And later, controversy over bio-enhancements in professional Parisi squares continues. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Hey, it's Crazy Chalaskie here. That's right, I'm back. I'm always trying to live way out there on the dagger's edge, thinking up absolutely nutty and zany ways to bring you quality products at the lowest bargain basement prices, and today is no exception. I've spent way too much time around these babes in bondage, and it's taught me one thing. These lackluster, leftover lovelies all have one thing in common. They secrete a pheromone that can drive a man so utterly and completely stark raving mad that one whiff can get most males to sell their own mothers for a second helping. And trust me, I've bought a few of these mothers, and they are nearly ripe for resale. But that's another commercial. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm prepared to just about give you this fine concoction for free. That's right, you heard me. Your ears aren't blocked, you're not deaf, and you heard correctly. Crazy, you say? You're freaking A right, I'm crazy, because I'm Crazy Chalaskie. And it's not a stretch to understand why I got the nickname, especially since I'm here now to offer you this sweet perfume. We're talking immediate and unconditional surrender in a little bottle. I call it Le Sur. You might recognize the Earth language as French. All perfume names are French. I've traveled from Alpha Centauri to Zeta Andromeda, and they're always in French. Alpha Quadrant French, Delta Quadrant French, don't ask me why. Anyway, translated, the name means sweat. That's right. It's a perfectly pungent and powerful perspiration that will render a man absolutely helpless, enabling the wearer to assume total command, and I'm giving you a few ounces to try for free. Once you see how effective it is, you ladies will be lining up to leave me Latin. I know the only question on your minds. Chalaskie, you query. How is it that you were unaffected? Well, that's easy. When I was but a lad, Mother Chalaskie warned me of this post-pubescent peril. In a monumentally masochistic maneuver, I took a piping hot poker to my olfactory membranes, nullifying that nasal nightmare. The pain was such that I sacrificed my sanity, but it was worth it. I can now continue to sell off my stable of slightly soiled sluts at drastically reduced prices. So to get your sample of Le Sur, send your name and address to gww.sweat.aquad. and I'll send you out at no charge of any kind 3 ounces of this priceless perspiration harvested from Orion harlots at the peak of their promiscuity. Why? Because I'm Crazy Chalaskie. Say it with me. Crazy Chalaskie. Crazy, crazy, crazy Chalaskie. And my prices are, wait for it, insane!
Good evening, and tonight we start with Season 7. A build has been pushed to Tribble and will be constantly updated until it launches the holodeck of the current offerings for Season 7. Of course, most important to us at PrimetimeUGC are the Foundry updates. All of these features need extensive testing, so please go forward and test. One of the items that was added were patrols. NPCs can now be set to follow specific paths throughout a map based on patrol nodes. This needs to be extensively tested, but seems to work fairly well even with doors and other obstacles in the way. Another change with Season 7 is the ability to make an NPC go from visible to hidden. This is the same as we can do with objects, and there are no animations that tie into this, which is hopefully an aspect that will be changed later on so that we can actually beam out objects and users as opposed to them just vanishing. Also, an import-export for costume models was added. This appears to be account limited, so it's not possible to share costumes with other users, a feature that we must make sure we ask for in later implementations. But it will now make it possible for you to share costumes for ships and or NPCs between various projects. This only is with costumes right now, and we can hope that later maps are added to have a similar feature. Mugatos were added as an NPC group, which gives a true ground melee one. It's hopeful that the animations for them punching will work with regular humanoid NPCs, but this remains to be seen. Also, various UI improvements were added. Additionally, Into the Hive is gone to Tribble. Into the Hive is the final part of the current Special Task Force Borg storyline, and takes the player deep into the heart of a Borg Unimatrix in order to defeat the Borg Queen. We also saw the launch of the Romulan Colony Adventure Zone, which seems to be very similar to the Deferi Invasion Zone, except ties into the new Romulan reputation system. There's also the Azure Nebula Rescue, which is a 5-man space mission that is similar to the Starbase Blockade, and a whole new sector block, the Tal Dewa sector, home to the Azure Nebula, and 17 other new systems, many familiar to Star Trek fans, including the Narenda system, Galordan's Core, Suliban, Kittimer, and Nimbus. Additionally, the STO Gateway was introduced. This is a beta test of a web interface that will allow players to access, right now only characters on Tribble, information on their characters and ships. It is hoped that in the near future, other features will be added to this to allow interaction with other aspects of the game, such as the DOF system. Also this week, Feature Project 8 was announced. This contains bar enhancements for Klingon starbases, while Federation starbases acquired a new wall-spanning fish tank. Deck 8 interviewed PWE Brandflakes. Priority 1 visited Cryptic Studios and interviewed Cryptic Kestrel, Tumor Boy, Jam Jams, and Thomas the Cat, which they talked about all things art, be it ships, UI, or environments. And they also interviewed Captain Gecko and Cryptic Bordicus and previewed the 1,000-day ships before they were released to holodeck, which brings us to the 1,000-day vet rewards. The Federation got a Chimera-class destroyer, while the Klingons got the Peg-Ku destroyer. Both of these have two different modes: regenerative mode that gives bonuses to defense and a tachyon inversion beam to drain shields, tactical mode, which has a race-appropriate Lotus attack system, which targets multiple ships with a heavy beam attack. Also announced was a lifetime sale that will be running through November 12th. Lifetime purchasers gain access to all veteran rewards through the 1,000 day as soon as they acquire a lifetime subscription. This has caused a great deal of discontent inside the lifer community, who feel that it in some way cheapens their commitment to the game. And finally, the Foundry Spotlight. 2 new missions have been chosen since our last broadcast. The Klingon mission by Captain Revo, The Fire in Which We Burn, and Starbase UGC's own Kirkfat with Relics, a Fed mission. And that is the news.
Good evening, and welcome to Primetime UGC's guest author interview. Unfortunately, Logitech 007, who is to be our guest, could not be with us tonight, so I'll be playing the part of Logitech 007. So, let's get the ball rolling. And here he is, Logitech 007.
Hello, I'm Logitech 007.
Not really, but his mic broke. Okay, Logitech, first question. When did you begin playing STO, and when and why did you begin using the Foundry?
I started playing STO, I believe, after the game was out for a year. I'm a Star Trek fan, and I saw the ads for the game when it first came out, and I was unable to buy the game, so I had written the name down. And finally I bought it at about the 1 year or just after 1 year had passed, and I started it and loved it. I made it to level 50 in about 6 months or so. And then I heard from a friend and saw it on a few sites that in the game you were going to be able to create your own missions. So about 6 or 7 months after I got the game, I began making missions in the Foundry.
What Star Trek series most inspires your work, and why?
Well, I try to pull from all of them, but sorry to say, but I'm a big fan of Voyager and Deep Space Nine, and the great massive CGI battles that DS9 had. I thought those were awesome.
Do you take any inspiration from any non-Trek sources?
No, not really. I try to include some other things, but not really. I try to stay a true believer in Star Trek, so I'm usually in Starbase UGC chat room, talking and bothering Zorbane, Rogue Enterprise, Captain P.F. Dennis, or Bazag for some idea or another that's Star Trek, because I want to stay true to Star Trek. And just to be an author, I try to make some things up.
Who do you write your missions for?
I tend to write for everybody, but at the start, my missions were all about battles and whatnot. But as time went along, I started to have both battles and diplomacy parts of my missions. Now I think I have about 50-50 on the battles and diplomacy, with a few big battles in this mission and in the next part, which I just published. I think people are really going to enjoy the story.
Have you played a Foundry mission, and it can be one of your own, that has ever given you an oh my god moment?
Well, my 2 newest ones, some of Rogue Enterprises, Zorbane's, Captain P.F. Dennis, and some of Bazag's missions that I have played were awesome, and was like, wow, a really good story and awesome map design. So that's why I try to get their opinions on stuff.
With all the nice new features in Tribble's Foundry, what feature would you like to see added next?
Well, I'd like a spell check button that you can spell check your dialogue before publishing, adding in the Chintaka system to the game, adding those Cardassian orbital weapons platforms, adding more Foundry assets and more vessels, adding a better rating system, too, to the game for Foundry missions. I'm tired of getting 1 stars where people left no comments.
Now it's time for our wrap-up questionnaire that we're calling the Primetime 5. We'll ask 5 questions for you to answer, each with a choice. No elaboration necessary.
Coke or Pepsi?
Both.
Constitution or Galaxy class?
Galaxy.
Kirk or Picard?
Picard.
McDonald's or Burger King?
McDonald's.
Klingon or Romulan?
Romulan.
Okay, very interesting. That's going to do it for this week's author interview. Thank you so much, Logitech 007, for joining us. Please keep giving us content.
Hey, thanks for having me. Anytime.
And now, a special editorial from Primetime UGC News. As stated, Season 7 has gone to Tribble, and with it are changes to the Foundry. Long history has shown us that whenever a season push goes live, something invariably happens to the Foundry that causes it to go offline for a period of time until the issues can be resolved. I, for one, would like this to be because of an issue other than appropriate testing and notification of issues before the build goes live. So I call on each and every one of you, dear viewers, to go forth and test this build. Make sure there are as few of issues as possible when it goes live. Make sure that missions publish, that they don't have crippling holes in geometry, or any of the other myriad issues that have plagued us in the past. I know there are many shiny things that have gone in with this new season that deserve testing as well, but I, for one, want to be publishing Foundry missions within hours of Season 7 going live, not weeks. Thank you for your time and for your consideration, and good evening.
Welcome to Episode 17's Mini-Mission Review. This time we have Logitech 007's Tempus Fugit Principium. This was a refreshing experience and we'll tell you why in a minute.
Yes, and it's the first in a series, with the second installment just newly published, I believe. Let's get to Part 1 and story.
We begin with the story, which is an exciting and interesting romp through several systems of the STO universe. Slowly, you begin to uncover facts, alliances, and characters that don't seem to match your known reality. In the end, what you discover still fits well with established canon, and the author includes some nicely researched bits of lore and legend. Some of the research done for this mission was impressive, and it added greatly to the quality of the story. Unfortunately, the typos could be very distracting, and we encourage the author to go through the mission with a big red pen. On the plus side, we could tell how excited Logitech was while writing the story.
I have to say that I was confused going in until I realized where he was going with it. Then I couldn't wait to see how it would all mesh together. It was an approach that snuck up on you and was not telegraphed. This is something I thoroughly enjoyed, but I must agree that Logi should pull this down and go through it for a typo and grammar cleansing. Once that is done, this mission will rank high on anyone's list. We gave story 4.5 stars. Now map design.
Each of the maps suited the mission just fine, and there were no unnecessary map transitions. I appreciated that Logitech utilized some of the new bridges in the Foundry like the Jemadar set. There were also lots of effects thrown in for good measure. I do think that the ship interior could have better directed the player. I got to engineering and realized that I had to go back and kill the mobs that I missed. Perhaps this map could be tweaked.
I was struck by Logi's use of large spaces like the Jem'Hadar base. It was well designed in his use of NPCs. It brought a smile to see groups of Jem'Hadar relaxed and standing around in conversation. It gave life to his sets. We gave map design another 4.5. Here's tech.
For me, everything worked as it should, and I didn't encounter any real bugs. I do think a few things could be tweaked with the tech of the dialogues. It's entirely a personal preference, but I really don't like using the out-of-character text as my captain's voice, particularly when much of it is short enough that it now fits in the buttons. I personally would have appreciated much more choice with the dialogue responses, because some of the things I had to say, well, they just didn't sound like my captain.
I have to disagree here. I completely understand writing for the player, as I employ this technique in every one of my missions. I think it is sometimes necessary to direct the flow of story, so that didn't faze me. Although, with all the activity in this mission, I found that some of the tricorder scanning could have been omitted. There was already plenty for the player to do. We gave tech 3.5 stars. Finally and reluctantly, difficulty.
This really was a mixed bag for me. I got through most of it, and it was fun and challenging. It had been a long time since I'd fought either the Breen or the Jemadar, so I really enjoyed some of the fights. However, the Breen ground captain was pretty brutal, especially when the fight came into the ready room. But the showstopper was the last space battle, because I couldn't complete it. I'll let the captain say more in his review of the difficulty. Captain, what did you think?
I was blown to bits a few times, but managed to muddle through until the large fleet battles near the finish with my unlikely allies. They were soon vanquished, however, and I was left to my own devices against 6 battleships. It wasn't pretty. This battle was too unbalanced, and even trying to pick them out one by one was impossible because they were too closely grouped. We realized that Logi is going for an STF feel, but neither of us could finish the mission. Logi should revisit the grammar and difficulty level. This is going to be a first for us, and we will not rate this category. In all fairness to a promising new author, Kirkfat and I agreed that the mission, in our humble view, is not yet finished.
As Logitech stated in our interview, a feature he would like to see in the Foundry is a spell checker. He's certainly not alone in this. Many authors have difficulty in this area. What is usually needed is some help testing your work by someone with a fresh perspective.
Yes, a second set of eyes can see the problems we miss, as we've read it 100 times before we hit the publish button. As for the battles, well, that's an easy enough fix.
And that's our review of Tempus Fugit Principium by Logitech 007.
A mission that could be among the finest with a bit more polish.
Go forth, Stow community, and create and play Foundry missions.
And go and try this mission for yourselves. See you in 2.
And hello, Stow community. Welcome to part 4 of our Back to Basics tutorial series. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk mostly about enemies and all the different pieces of tribal knowledge relating to putting enemies in a Foundry mission. However, before I really get into that, let's just see where we are. We're back at the same mission that we were working on in part 3. There's DJ Zuza. He says, hey you, go to Vulcan, pick up a diplomat. Then there's a first transition to a cryptic map. He says, we're entering the Vulcan system. And there's this button. I'm going to talk more about this button in a few seconds, but with the storyboard, you get to Vulcan, then you approach the planet, which was the big circle on the map, and once the player hits this edge of the circle, it transitions into the map on the ground where the object or the objective is to talk to a contact. And so there's our Vulcan diplomat, and I put her on Vulcan right there. Now she's an NPC contact, which means that she will never fight, she'll never shoot a gun, but she can die, especially if she's too close to an enemy mob and grenades are thrown. So be very careful with that. The NPC contact can die, but otherwise it's just one single person that is in the mission to talk to. That's the only purpose of an NPC contact. There's also a few things you can do. You can animate her, you make her afraid, you could make her play air guitar or do various other animations, and you can change her state with triggers. Don't worry about triggers too much. We'll talk about those in a different tutorial. But anyways, that's my story. You get hailed by DJ Zuza, you go to Vulcan, you beam down, you talk to a Vulcan diplomat. I do want to say something about this first button that takes you into the Vulcan system. What will happen in here, I'll go ahead and show you what this looks like. Let's type in this button says stuff. Alright, and let's play the map from the beginning of the story, because that will put us in sector space. If you play the map from the map tab, it'll just load you onto the map that you're working on. But if you load the map from the storyboard, it will take you to sector space, and this is Foundry sector space, so you'll never see anybody else around here usually. And we'll set a course to the Vulcan system. Alright, so DJ Zuza hailed us. We accepted the mission, and now we've gone on to Vulcan. And as soon as we get to Vulcan, there is the door. We can enter the normal Vulcan system, which other players might be using as a social zone, or we can enter the mission that we're making. And notice there's the button. It says, this button says stuff. So I'll say, okay, I'm ready to enter the mission. And there's the pop-up. We're entering the Vulcan system. Are you ready to enter? This button says stuff. And the reason that I did that was to show you that whatever you put in this button, whether it's engage or begin my mission or play my mission, it's going to appear twice. The button's going to appear at the entry door in sector space, and it's also going to appear as it is in this dialog prompt. So I know what I like to do is I like to use begin, and then whatever the name of my mission is, I'll put there. And so they'll have to click begin twice, but at least it makes sense in both contexts, in both parts. It makes sense in the pop-up and it makes sense in sector space. So that's what I wanted to show you real quick. All right, now let's deal with NPC groups. So I've got two maps here, Vulcan Space and Vulcan Ground. Let's say that I want to have an enemy mob in space, and before the player reaches the marker and beams down, they have to fight some ships. So we'll go here to NPC groups, and the first thing that you may notice is when you click on an NPC group, it will say it will have different restrictions based on the enemy mob. So this may be really tough for a free-to-player to understand, because there was a time when all of us played all of the cryptic content of the game from start to finish, and you had a sense of what level an enemy was based on their position in the overall story of the game. So the Borg arc was one of the last of the mission chains, so the Borg were really strong. And therefore, if you put Borg in a map now, only players that are above level 41 can play your mission. They won't see your mission if they're not up to the level to play it. Likewise, if you use a Klingon mob, well, the Klingons were some of the first people we fought, so there's no restriction. Anybody can play your mission if you use a Klingon squad. So there's a bit of tribal knowledge here. For instance, the Mirror Federation squadrons, they're restricted to 31 because, well, they were kind of in the 31 area of the game. So you can get used to that. Now, there are workarounds. For instance, if you really needed Borg, but you didn't want to restrict the mission to a level 41, you could just put an Orion mob in there, really any mob that has no restrictions, and then if you individually click on the actors, you can rename them Borg, and you can change their costume to Borg. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to fight like Borg. They're still going to fight like the ships that they are underneath the costumes. So a certain color of disruptor will still be attributed to the original mob, but they will look like Borg in the mission. And you can also do the same thing with NPC enemy squads on the ground. You can use Klingons and skin them as Borg and vice versa. But for this mission, I think I will use Klingons. So let's find Klingons. And immediately we have a choice. Our list has from battleship down to weak. Let's just click on weak, see what that says. Weak is, use this as it makes for a dull experience when overused. Use this sparingly. So, weak mobs goes from 2 frigates up to 4 frigates and 2 battleships. Well, let's put it in a mob and see put it in the map and see what it looks like. Scroll in. And the first question you probably have is, okay, well, there are 5 dots. What are those dots? Which one is which? If this thing goes from 2 frigates up to 4 frigates and 2 battleships, what does that mean? Well, what it means is this. All these 5 dots, the only time that 5 ships may appear as a mob is if 5 players are playing the mission, because the group scales. If just one person is playing your mission, it might just be 1 ship, or it might be 1 ship and a group of fighters. If 2 people are playing your mission, there might be quite a few more. If we go to Starbase UGC and you go to New Guides, Tutorial Guides, XR377 made this really handy, it's way at the bottom, really handy guide to NPC scaling. And that's a handy thing to use if you want to know which mob or which actors will appear with a mob depending on how many players are playing your mission. Okay, so that should help you with scaling, but another question you might have is, how difficult is the mob. One thing that you really need to know right now as you begin your career as a Foundry author is that you'll never ever really be able to test how your mission is experienced. It might be hard to one person and completely easy to another person. Or depending on their level, how many players are playing the mission, it's just not something you can test. And what's also frustrating is that when you do play the map in the Foundry, when you test it with your Foundry tune, the mobs will be incredibly easy. But once you publish that mission, the play experience will be completely different. For instance, I have a mission that I just published. It played completely different after publishing than it did when testing with my Foundry tune. It's just something you have to kind of deal with. Now, there are smart things and dumb things. Smart would be never put more than one mob in one place. You can sometimes do this if you say you put a Klingon weak squad with a Klingon set of fighters. That might work, or maybe 2 frigates in the same spot might work, but otherwise you don't want to put 2 cruisers in the same spot, and you especially don't want to put more than 1 battleship in the same spot, because it just makes it incredibly difficult for the player. So that's a general rule, is 1 mob per spot, and you won't really know how the player is experiencing the combat until you start to get reviews. Oh, I should show you that we can put the enemies in the map. So kill enemies. And we'll specify the enemy that we want to kill. It's the Klingon squad. And now there's an additional task in the storyboard, which means that the first thing the player is going to do when he gets to Vulcan is fight Klingons and then beam down to the planet. Alright, well, I hope that's helpful. Stay tuned for next time. Bye.
Thank you.